This is attempt 913 to talk about racial representation in web series. I keep trying to do this because it is something that is super important to me, and I want to be able to do the topic justice and not just kind of ramble about it. Part of my concern when approaching this issue is that I think I differ a little bit from most of the community, not in the sense of thinking that it's bad to talk about racial representation or representation at all. Rather, I think that sometimes we place too great an emphasis on kind of guilt, shame, expectations, demands, rather than recognizing that there is a difference in culture in web series land versus kind of Hollywood and culture at large. And so, for me, I look at web series, and it's true, when it comes to racial representation, things are not the greatest. Usually, this corresponds very, very highly with where the series is being produced and by whom. Most of the series that kind of have a little bit of money or are from places with pretty good racial representation kind of in the demographics and the population, you actually kind of see that reflected, and you see that it's something that's important to them. Definitely every single show, bar none, has talked about how the matter of representation is important to them. And that is kind of incredible in itself. And then those shows that usually don't have such good kind of diversity usually come from places that themselves are not as diverse as, say, New York or Los Angeles or a lot of other metropolitan cities or different places in the world. And so sometimes you see these really kind of aggressive or passive-aggressive demands made of creators of why don't you have better, racial representation? Why don't you do this? Why aren't more of your characters kind of not white? And sometimes it starts to feel less like you're actually asking for representation than you fetishize the notion of representation and are missing the broader context. And I know that it comes from a good place. When I use the word fetishization, I know that these are every single one of us, every single one of you. Hold that thought while I turn off my alarm. I'm totally a mature grown-up. I woke up before time. When you are talking about kind of these issues because it really is important to you, but then it starts to feel less like understanding what it means to have representation, especially in demographics that do not necessarily support it, than just having kind of this checklist in your head of things that you have to have, things that you have to say. And I think that's very dangerous. I think that at the end of the day, by putting our pressure on small producers and web series who don't have casting or budget rather than Marvel, we are doing both a disservice to the web series, which encourage incredible representation and diversity in every other means possible, and we are doing a disservice to the broader movement by forgetting where its context is and where its cultural kind of origin comes from. And so I'm not a huge fan of how the discourse is being handled. I love that we are having this conversation. I think it's critical. Obviously, I am 100% for seeing more of the world on our screens. I think that that should be obvious from my writing and definitely from my attempts to break you all of your Anglocentrism. Those two go together, shockingly. And it's important for me to see the whole world on our screen, yeah, but I don't think that shouting down creators who are just kind of making something out of love just three friends, a camera in the basement, shouting at them that they don't have good racial representation when, you know, they live in a, like, 85% white area, and I have actually checked the demographics for kind of the shows with the worse representation, and yeah, we are ultimately placing the worst pressure on the people who are trying the hardest and the people who care most. And I think it is extremely meaningful that the response to almost every single ask and demand and sometimes very rude kind of message about the issue is always met with outright acceptance and openness on behalf of the creators. This is something that the community 100% accepts and recognizes as being important. And so yeah, we should continue to accept and recognize this as important, but we should also remember to put it in its proper context. And so always discuss. It's always the right thing. But maybe we don't have to shout, and maybe we don't have to be that kind of judgmental and that kind of demanding, I guess. Especially when we don't necessarily understand all of the surroundings, and there are a lot of other factors. So yeah, those are kind of my differing thoughts as regards racial representation. Again, I really have to emphasize this. I am for racial representation, obviously. I would love to, you know, see more series where you can kind of see myself and yourself and everyone's selves on screen. But sometimes it feels like maybe we're not having the right conversation, and definitely like we're not targeting the right people. So yeah, tell me what you think in comments or whatever.